Have you ever heard of it? That's Sultan Abdulhamid II, with just a single letter, made Muslims on the far side of the Pacific submit to America. Yes, it sounds unbelievable, but this really happened, and it went down in history as one of the most surprising and least known diplomatic moves ever. The story we tell today is one of the most controversial diplomatic maneuvers in history. Some historians see this decision as a bitter capitulation that damaged the prestige of the Caliphate. Others argue it was Abdulhamid's pragmatic genius move, giving global influence to a weakened Ottoman Empire. But what do you think? Was this an act of submission or a display of strategic genius? Let's explore this surprising story together and discuss it in the comments. The year is 1899. The Ottoman Empire is now called the Sick Man, its political power badly weakened. Yet the office of the Caliph still holds unquestioned authority for millions of Muslims. At the same time, the United States is emerging as a new colonial power expanding across the Pacific. After the Spanish-American War, the U.S. seizes the Philippines, but in the south, they face fierce resistance from the Moro Muslims. This people, who had resisted the Spanish for centuries, refused to bow to the Americans as well. Despite modern weapons, the Moros fight with guerrilla tactics, inflicting heavy losses on the U.S. Army. Washington finds itself desperate. At this moment, U.S. Secretary of State John Hay proposes an unusual idea: use the authority of the Ottoman Caliph. The mission falls to Ambassador Oscar Straus in Istanbul. His task is simple but bold: persuade Sultan Abdulhamid II to send a letter to the Muslims of the Philippines, telling them to submit to American rule. And Abdulhamid makes the decision that marks history. He sends a letter to the Moro Muslims, asking them to submit to American rule. With a single signature, the fate of a war thousands of kilometers away is changed. When Sultan Abdulhamid II ascended the throne, it was 1876. The Ottoman Empire was already called the Sick Man, and European powers were trying to carve off its lands from all sides. The army was weak, the treasury was in ruin. But Abdulhamid had one power that Europeans did not fully grasp: the Caliphate. The Caliphate represented not only the Ottoman Sultanate, but the spiritual leadership of the entire Muslim world. From India to North Africa, from Indonesia to the Middle East, millions of Muslims felt loyalty to the Ottoman Caliph. To them, Abdulhamid was not just a sultan. He was God's representative on earth. This realization gave birth to Abdulhamid's most important policy: Pan-Islamism. In other words, uniting all Muslims, no matter under which colonial rule they lived, around the Caliph. This was not merely a religious ideal. For the Ottoman Empire, it was also a powerful tool of diplomacy. The Sultan worked tirelessly to build connections with Muslims worldwide. He sent envoys, opened madrasas, launched newspapers, and dispatched letters. In India, Muslims secretly passed Abdulhamid's messages from hand to hand, reading them like a beacon of hope. Even in the most remote African villages, Abdulhamid's name had become a symbol of salvation. Naturally, this unsettled the Europeans. They knew that if the Ottoman Caliph made just one call, millions of Muslims in the colonies could rise up. That is why the European press often carried headlines about the pan-Islamic danger, portraying Abdulhamid as a new threat. But in reality, Abdulhamid was pragmatic. He used the Caliphate as a weapon against the West. Militarily and economically, the Ottoman Empire was weak. But thanks to the Caliphate, neither Britain nor France could easily challenge it. A potential uprising could cost them dearly. This was Abdulhamid's greatest success, turning spiritual authority into a foreign policy weapon. And this strategy extended far beyond Ottoman lands. In 1899, on the far side of the Pacific, as the Moro Muslims of the Philippines resisted the American army, the only name that came to mind was once again that of the Ottoman Caliph, Abdulhamid II. The Spanish-American War of 1898 shook the balance of the world. America quickly defeated Spain and suddenly unlocked the gates to a vast colonial empire. Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines were now under Washington's control. For America, this was not just a military victory. It was the announcement of their arrival as a Pacific power. But the Philippines was no easy prize. For centuries, the Spanish had tried to rule the islands, but they had never fully subdued the Muslim population in the south. These communities were made up of the Tausug, Maguindanao, and Maranao tribes. The Spanish gave them a single name: Moros. And the Moros had never ceased fighting for their faith and traditions. When the Americans took over, they faced the same reality. The Moros now raised their arms against the new colonial rulers. This resistance became known as the Moro Rebellion. The US Army had modern weapons, cannons, and rifles. But the Moros' faith, courage, and guerrilla tactics were enough to hold them back. Reports of the time note that Moro warriors never retreated in hand-to-hand combat. Many continued fighting even after being shot, because they did not fear death. American soldiers were stunned by such determination and suffered heavy losses. In short, Washington's plans were failing. They wanted to establish a lasting colonial order in the Philippines, but the Moro resistance would not allow it. No matter how many troops were sent, the rebellion would not die out. At this moment of desperation, the US government sought a different path. If military power failed, perhaps religious authority could succeed. For the Moros, the word of the Caliph carried far more weight than the threats of any foreign commander. Here, a key figure entered the stage: Oscar Straus, the US ambassador in Istanbul. Straus had gained Abdulhamid's trust and could enter the palace with ease. Secretary of State John Hay gave him this instruction: ask Sultan Abdulhamid to command the Muslims of the Philippines to submit to American rule. Straus understood the gravity of the task. If successful, America would, for the first time, harness the religious authority of the Ottoman Caliph to break resistance in its colony. If he failed, Washington might be left with no other option. Thus, the stage was set for one of the most unusual diplomatic maneuvers in history. The Ottoman Sultan would address Muslims on the far side of the Pacific, calling on them to submit to a Christian power. Summer of 1899. The request from America to Istanbul was clear. The Caliph must order the Muslims in the Philippines to submit. This was an extraordinary moment in history. A Christian power was appealing to the Islamic Caliph to subjugate a Muslim population in its colony. The task was given to Oscar Straus, the US ambassador in Istanbul. Straus was a diplomat well versed in the corridors of Yildiz Palace, having earned Abdulhamid II's trust, which allowed him to take on one of the most delicate missions. In the grand halls of the palace, the proposal was laid on the table. Your Majesty, We ask you to send a letter to the Muslims of the Philippines. Tell them to obey American authority. So what did Sultan Abdulhamid do? At first glance, the proposal seemed like a contradiction within the Islamic world. The Caliph would be calling Muslims to submit to a non-Muslim power. This could damage his authority. But Abdulhamid read the situation differently. To him, this was a unique opportunity to prove that the Ottoman Empire still held global influence. Military and economic strength had waned, yes, but a single signature could still stop wars across oceans. He made his decision. He would accept the proposal. But he would do it not with an ordinary diplomatic note, but with a cleverly crafted maneuver. The letter was carefully prepared. The message was clear. Obey American authority, maintain peace, and do not disturb order. The Caliph's signature and seal made these lines appear like a sacred command. Moreover, Abdulhamid did not want the letter to be sent directly from Istanbul. That would have made it look like an ordinary diplomatic exchange. Instead, he ensured the letter was sent through the heart of the Islamic world, Mecca. Delivered via the Sharif of Mecca to the Sultanate of Sulu, the message was no longer just a letter. It became a religious decree, a direct call from the Caliph to his people. When the letter reached the Moro leaders, its impact was immediate. The name of the Caliph was an unquestionable authority for them. Many sources claim this letter changed the course of the resistance. Indeed, an American commander of the time wrote in his report, "The Sulu Muslims refused to join the rebels and placed themselves under the control of our army. Thus, they recognized American sovereignty." Just think about it. What hundreds of soldiers and months of fighting could not achieve, a single letter accomplished. Abdulhamid, with nothing but a piece of paper and his seal, had stopped a war across the ocean. For the Americans, this was a great victory. But for the Ottomans, the message was far more meaningful. The Caliphate was still powerful. Abdulhamid had managed to balance the empire's declining political strength with his religious authority. Sultan Abdulhamid II's letter to the Moro Muslims in the Philippines worked in the short term. Much of the resistance was broken, and the Sultanate of Sulu recognized American rule. Reports in Washington proudly stated, "The Sulu Muslims refused to join the rebels and accepted American authority." So what did this event achieve, and for whom? From the Ottoman perspective, at first glance it seemed contradictory. For the Caliph to call on a Muslim community to submit to a Christian power sparked debate among historians. Some argued it damaged the prestige of the Caliphate. But for Abdulhamid, the matter was entirely different. It was proof that the Ottoman Empire was still a player in global politics. Though militarily weakened, the empire could still shake the world with the word of the Caliph. The fact that Washington knocked on Istanbul's door was itself a reminder of the Ottoman Empire's central role in the Muslim world. From America's perspective, for them, this was almost a revelation. For the first time, they had turned to religious authority to subdue a Muslim community. And the result was astonishing. A single letter achieved what thousands of soldiers could not. This experience also shaped how the US would view the Middle East and the Islamic world in the years to come. For they now understood the Caliphate was far more than just a title on paper. Historical legacy. Looking back today, this event reveals three truths. The power of the Caliphate. Even though the Ottomans were militarily and politically weak, the name of the Caliph was still accepted as law on the far side of the world. America's first Islamic encounter. The U.S. had its first major interaction with a Muslim society in the Philippines, and it solved it through the Caliph. The impact of Pan-Islamism. Abdulhamid's strategy of uniting the Ummah resonated not only within Ottoman borders, but on a global scale. Of course, the event remains controversial. Some historians argue Abdulhamid surrendered Muslims to America, while others claim he cleverly reminded the world of Ottoman power. But one fact is beyond debate. An Ottoman sultan changed the course of a war in the Pacific with a single letter. And here lies the real question. Was this one of Abdulhamid's brightest displays of diplomatic genius, or a bitter sign of the Ottoman Empire's desperation?